Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, President Trump confirms that U.S. and Ukrainian officials will meet next week. The two sides will meet in Saudi Arabia to discuss ending the war, what Trump says about the difference between working with Russia and Ukraine. A manufacturing turnaround, that's what President Trump is touting as he doubles down on his tariff policies. But questions remain over how massive layoffs will impact jobs numbers in the coming months. Iris Tao has more. Crypto industry leaders meet with the Trump administration at the first ever White House Crypto Summit. The president says he believes it's important for the U.S. to stay in the lead with digital assets. Jason Blair has more. 2 U.S. Army soldiers and 1 retired soldier accused of selling sensitive military intelligence to China. Jack Bradley has more on that, plus what the State Department says about foreign nationals who appear to support Hamas and other designated terror groups. And new details have emerged about the deaths of actor Gene Hackman and his wife Betsy Arakawa. The findings indicate that both passed away due to serious underlying health conditions.
This is NTD Evening News, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. President Trump confirms that U.S. and Ukrainian officials are set to meet again. Saudi Arabia says it welcomes the chance to host the meeting. Here's the latest on the Ukraine war.
As you know, we're meeting in Saudi Arabia on sometime next week early.
President Trump on Friday confirming that another meeting between U.S. and Ukrainian officials is planned for next week. The talks aimed at finding a deal to end the 3-year conflict with Russia. Trump says working towards a peace deal with Ukraine has been surprisingly difficult so far.
Getting a final settlement, it may be easier dealing with Russia, which is surprising because they have all the cards. I'm finding it more difficult, frankly, to deal with Ukraine.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky confirmed the meeting, saying he'll travel to Saudi Arabia on Monday.
Today, the most intensive work with President Trump's team at various levels has been ongoing all day. Many calls. The focus is clear. Peace as soon as possible. Security as reliably as possible.
By security, Zelensky most likely refers to security guarantees. Ukraine wants the U.S. to help secure Ukraine after the war ends. Here's what Trump said about that on Friday.
As far as the question about security later, that's the easy part. The hard part is getting it settled.
And President Trump says that he might impose new sanctions on Russia. That's over continuous attacks on Ukraine. On Friday morning, Trump posted that he's strongly considering large-scale banking sanctions, and tariffs on Russia until a ceasefire is reached. He also told Russia and Ukraine to get to the table and start talks before it's too late. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said previously that the U.S. won't hesitate to impose sanctions on Russian energy if it helps lead to a ceasefire.
A manufacturing turnaround, that's what President Trump is touting as he doubles down on his tariff policies. But questions remain over how massive layoffs will impact jobs numbers in the coming months. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao has more.
And President Trump taking credit for a February surge in manufacturing jobs, calling it proof that his new policies are attracting new investments and bringing jobs back.
We've not only stopped that manufacturing collapse, but we've begun to rapidly reverse it and get major gains. We created 10,000 manufacturing jobs in February alone. That hasn't happened in a long time.
Most of the new manufacturing jobs come from the auto industry. Overall, the U.S. economy added over 150,000 jobs last month, though the unemployment rate ticked up to 4.1%. Despite concerns about the impact of federal government layoffs, Trump says his goal is to shrink the government and grow the private sector.
But it's going to have high-paying manufacturing jobs as opposed to government jobs. We had too many people in government.
And more actions to come on tariffs. Trump announces putting reciprocal tariffs on Canada's U.S. lumber and dairy products as soon as next week. And asked about recent changes he's made to his own tariff policies and concerns about market instability, Trump says tariffs are always changing, and the ultimate goal is to push companies to produce right here in the U.S.
Some modifications. I mean, if you have a wall in front of you, sometimes you have to go around the wall instead of through it.
And President Trump this week paused his tariffs on some goods coming in from Mexico and Canada, though his new 20% tariffs on China remain in place despite retaliation. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
And today, the Trump administration held the first ever White House Crypto Summit. This following the president's creation of the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve. NTD correspondent Jason Blair joins us from Washington to talk more about this. Good evening, Jason. What can you tell us about this first of its kind meeting?
Yeah, hey, Tiffany. So first, a little background on the Strategic Crypto Reserve. According to the White House, the main idea is to get the most value out of the current cryptocurrency that the government already has. So the federal government already has some Bitcoin that it's acquired through civil asset and criminal forfeitures. And one rule with this Bitcoin, these Bitcoin reserves, is that the federal government cannot sell them. They can only leave them as a reserve currency. And in another rule, the government is technically allowed to buy more Bitcoin for this reserve. However, it has to be strategically justified. And the White House used specific terms using budget neutral and, quote, will impose no incremental costs on American taxpayers. So the White House did emphasize a couple of times today, actually, that no taxpayer dollars will be used to buy more Bitcoin for these reserves. Now, the White House also said that currently no clear policy has ever existed in this area, so this is something that they think is an important thing to do. So David Sachs, the White House crypto czar, did talk about this earlier from the White House. Here are some of his comments.
We believe this is a valuable asset that we should store for the American public and preserve that value for the long term. Now, again, I'm not going to advise any individual on what they should do, because when an individual makes a decision, they have to take into account their personal financial needs. And the reality is that crypto, including Bitcoin, is very volatile. And so, I would not, I'm just speaking frankly here, if you're a retiree on a fixed income and you need that money, I would not invest in any volatile asset, right?
So during this first ever White House crypto summit, the Trump administration officials met with leaders in this industry as well as President Trump himself. And the president did say he thinks it's very important for the U.S. to continue to lead in this area, specifically mentioning ambitions from China. Here are some of Trump's comments from earlier today.
I thought it was very important that we stay in the front of this one. This is a big one. And as you know, China is pushing forward and very strongly as usual. But we're way in the lead, as we are in AI and other things, and we want to stay there. So I thought this was very important, and we have some brilliant people sitting around this table, and it's an honor to have you involved.
So White House crypto czar David Sachs did say that the main objective of holding this summit is to invite these industry leaders in and get their advice and feedback as they create this new reserve. Back to you.
All right, Jason, thanks for keeping on top of that. Can an asset as volatile as Bitcoin be used as a reserve? Our data reporter Kevin Hogan explains.
Fort Knox stores gold, but President Trump, through executive order, wants to create what his crypto czar calls a digital Fort Knox, and that's the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve. It'll hold Bitcoin, Ethereum, other things that the United States has, and they usually get it from the U.S. Marshals seizing it from illegal activity. Why now? There could be a couple reasons for that, but according to David Sachs, Trump's crypto czar, that's $17 billion that the United States has lost because they sold their Bitcoin prematurely. Now, that's a lot of money, and they're trying to make sure that they have that in their hand. So what does that actually look like on a timeline? Well, you see that, again, these market rallies always happen after these sell-offs. So the black, those are when the auctions go on and the U.S. Marshals sell their seized Bitcoin, and the Bitcoin value is shown here in green. So, I mean, it's almost about 100,000, 90,000 or so right now. But look at this. Before the market rallies right here, at this market rally, then that's when they sold it off. So they sold it at a low point. Again, another point right here. They sold it right there. What happened after another rally happened? They sold this big one right here, and then a big rally. So they keep losing their money because they sell it prematurely. Trump and the borders in these crypto czars just want to put a stop to that and hold this. It's part of Trump's efforts to make the United States a crypto capital of the world, to use his term for it. Now, at the same time, you look at the sales of this. Well, you also talk about the big X factor, that's the volatility. So we're just looking at volatility in a couple different assets. This is how much the US dollar changes with respect to the euro. So you're looking anywhere from about 1% to 4%. It's pretty stable, it's pretty low. What about gold to the US dollar? A little more volatility, but again, you're still into that 1% to 6% range. But when you look at Bitcoin to the US dollar, how volatile is that? That just starts shooting up. Let me clear this for you. That's up to 80% in its early days. It started around 2009, and then it has kind of tapered off. Here, let me draw this envelope for you so you can see the peaks. See, it's becoming a little bit more stable. That volatility peaks are just, reducing down, but that's still 30%. So the real question is, can this asset be used as a reserve? Because according to, for example, Investopedia, they say that if you're going to use your crypto assets as your capital backing, well, you have just as much odds on losing all of that as you do gaining it. And now the United States, it does have quite a bit of cryptocurrency. For example, right now, it has about 200,000 Bitcoin. And that's a lot of money. That's $17 billion. So Trump wants to keep all that. And he says it's not going to cost the American taxpayer a dime. Back to you.
U.S. soldiers charged with selling sensitive military information to China. This while the State Department cracks down on foreign nationals who appear to support terrorist groups. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has the details.
2 active-duty U.S. Army soldiers and a former soldier were arrested on Thursday over allegedly selling military information to China. The 2 soldiers are Jian Zhao and Li Tian, stationed in Washington state, and the former soldier is Rouyu Duan. Now, the group allegedly stole several classified hard drives and sensitive documents and then sold them to individuals in China. This top secret information concerned weapon systems and military readiness in the event of a potential conflict with China. Attorney General Pam Bondi said in a statement, quote, "The defendants arrested today are accused of betraying our country, actively working to weaken America's defense capabilities and empowering our adversaries in China." Also, FBI Director Kash Patel said that this behavior from our service members who are entrusted with sensitive military information cannot be tolerated. Meanwhile, the Trump administration said yesterday that foreigners who support Hamas and other terrorists will be deported. Now, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that the State Department will deport foreigners who break the law in support of terrorists. Rubio mentioned specifically international students in the U.S. supporting terrorist groups. Senator Tom Cotton came out in support of Rubio's statement, posting on X that a green card or student visa does not give individuals the right to break our laws, harass our students, and openly sympathize with terrorists. A State Department spokesperson confirmed to me today that the department has broad authority to revoke visas. They also said, quote, "The United States has zero tolerance for foreign visitors who support terrorists. Violators of U.S. law, including international students, may face visa denial or revocation." Now, this comes after this week when President Trump promised to revoke federal funding for colleges that allow illegal agitations on campus. Columbia University has become the first to face defunding, and that's over alleged anti-Semitism during student protests on campus following the Hamas terrorist attack on Israel. The Trump administration canceled federal grants to Columbia University on Friday, worth around $400 million. And they expect to cut more funding as the school holds about $5 billion in federal grants. And on this, earlier this week, Secretary Rubio announced a new policy that restricts the visas of foreign government officials if they facilitate illegal immigration. And that policy targets Immigration, Customs, and Port and Airport Authority officials. Jack Bradley, NTD News.
The FBI has added former Canadian Olympic snowboarder Ryan Wedding to its 10 most wanted list, offering a $10 million reward for information leading to his arrest. Wedding is accused of running a massive international drug trafficking network and orchestrating multiple murders linked to the ring. Authorities say he distributed cocaine across U.S. cities and Canada. They say he used long-haul semi-trucks to move an estimated 60 tons of cocaine annually between Colombia, Mexico, Southern California, and Canada. The FBI calls Wedding a very dangerous man, citing the alleged murders of his competitors. Prosecutors say his group also killed 2 people in Canada in a mistaken identity case. Wedding, also known by aliases Public Enemy and James Conrad King, was charged with murder and drug crimes last June. Authorities in Santa Fe, New Mexico confirmed today that actor Gene Hackman passed away from heart disease, while his wife Betsy Arakawa died from hantavirus approximately 1 week earlier. The couple's bodies were found last month at their home in New Mexico.
The cause of death for Mr. Gene Hackman, aged 95 years, is hypertensive and atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, with Alzheimer's disease as a significant contributory factor. Examination of the brain showed advanced Alzheimer's disease, as well as blood vessel changes in the brain secondary to chronic high blood pressure.
An autopsy and full body CT scan of actor Gene Hackman revealed no signs of trauma. However, it showed severe heart disease, multiple heart surgeries, prior heart attacks, and kidney damage from high blood pressure. Officials confirmed that Hackman's wife, Betsy Arakawa, passed away from hantavirus a week earlier. Hantavirus is a rare disease that spreads through rodent droppings, typically in spring and summer. Though officials found signs of rodent entry in other structures, the risk at their primary residence was considered low. Tests for carbon monoxide poisoning, COVID-19, influenza, and other viruses were negative for both Hackman and Arakawa. Coming up, Democrats and Republicans are divided over government funding and have 1 week to avoid a shutdown. Luis Martinez with the latest from Capitol Hill. Britain's foreign secretary says Japan should ramp up economic pressure on Russia to help Ukraine. Meanwhile, Ukraine says it has received the first set of funds from the proceeds of frozen Russian assets. Malcolm Hudson in London. And European leaders say they will significantly increase military spending. They're also considering deploying soldiers on the ground in Ukraine. David Vivez brings us more from Paris after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Republican and Democratic lawmakers are divided over their party's agenda, and Congress has 1 week to avoid a government shutdown. NTD's Washington correspondent Luis Martinez walks us through what is happening in our nation's capital.
Because I did disrupt. And I did so because the president indicated that he had a mandate. And I wanted him to know that he didn't have a mandate.
10 Democrats broke party line and joined Republicans to vote to censure Congressman Al Green, who disrupted the president's speech to a joint session of Congress last Tuesday.
You know what? I don't mind being one of 10 Democrats who said, no, there's a deeper principle at stake here, which is reverence for this institution.
Democratic lawmakers have publicly admitted to divisions within the House Democratic Conference.
So, look, I'm not going to lie. Don't think anybody looked good on Tuesday night. It's a very challenging situation. The House of Representatives is a representative body. Both caucuses have many people with different feelings.
And some Republican lawmakers are pushing back against the president's agenda, in particular against tariffs and government spending cuts.
We want to make sure that we're doing things with a scalpel and not a sledgehammer. I've had concerns with what happened last week when the CDC saw this across the board cut. And it impacted the 9/11 first responders in my district because
almost every industry in Kentucky has come to me and said it will hurt our industry and push up prices of homes, cars. And so I'm going to continue to argue against tariffs. I hope they'll not go in place, and I hope they won't cause a recession. But already they're talking about exemptions because even the people for them acknowledge that there are real problems with tariffs.
Divisions will have to be put aside if Congress hopes to avoid a government shutdown on March 14th when government funding expires. Republicans control Congress and plan on putting a continuing resolution to a vote on the House floor next week.
I believe we'll pass it along party lines, but I think every Democrat should vote for the CR. It is a fundamental responsibility we have to fund the government, and a clean CR with a few minor anomalies is not something that they should vote against, so we'll see what they do.
A year-long continuing resolution is inconsistent with the Bipartisan Fiscal Responsibility Act. And so if Republicans decide to take this approach, as Speaker Johnson indicated, it's his expectation that Republicans are going it alone.
Next week, the Senate is expected to vote on the confirmation of Lori Chavez de Remer to be the next Labor Secretary. It is expected that she will be confirmed on a party line vote. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
President Trump announcing he's pulling back tariffs on neighboring Canada and Mexico. Meanwhile, on Truth Social, Trump says he's considering sanctions and tariffs on Russia until a peace deal is reached. What do everyday Americans think of all of this? NTD's Sam Wong was out in D.C. to hear from them.
President Trump is pulling back tariffs on Canada and Mexico, but tariffs on China as of now stays in place. So how do you assess his strategy here?
The strategy is the same that they did back before the Great Depression, and it's the exact same tariffs problems that we had. So why would we think it's going to work again?
Well, I think it's good that we have reciprocal tariffs. The average tariff that America pays, I believe, is 2%. Or we receive 2%, and we pay somewhere between 18 and 25, depending on other countries. Why is that fair?
I don't know if he really has a plan. I think he just moves big and loud and hopes that everyone will back down and give him what he wants.
I think it's going to be difficult in the end. I think it's going to cause undue expenses on Americans.
Well, I think in the long run, his motive is to, help the economy and make things better for America. If he succeeds in doing that, then we should all be applauding. I think there's a lot of people who are concerned about the way he's going about it, and maybe that's a little difficult to swallow.
I strongly believe that things should be made here in the U.S. I try to stay away from buying stuff made from China or Mexico. I am an American citizen, so I try to support the American people here.
President Trump this morning says he is considering imposing sanctions and tariffs on Russia, and that's until the peace deal comes through. So what do you think?
I'll believe it when I see it.
I mean, I'm all for sanctioning Russia. I'm all for encouraging peace in Ukraine. We'll see if he does it. I don't know.
We've spent millions of dollars or billions of dollars to Ukraine. He's going to have to make some kind of deal with Putin, but I just think that we need to keep our business here.
I think in the long run things are going to work out. It's a little unsettling to both Republicans and Democrats right now. Let's see how things work out.
I think sanctions certainly help. It creates an economic problem in the other country that's not receiving goods, services, financial revenue. So, yeah, that should be helpful.
Britain and Japan are seeking closer economic and trade ties amid U.S. tariff threats. The UK's foreign secretary says Japan should ramp up economic pressure on Russia. Meanwhile, Ukraine says it received the first set of funds from the proceeds of frozen Russian assets. NTD's international correspondent Malcolm Hudson has more for us.
British Foreign Secretary David Lammy said on Friday that Japan could help Ukraine by ramping up economic pressure on Russia. This during a meeting with his Japanese counterpart in Tokyo.
Putin's illegal war in Ukraine was a major focus. We both want to see this war brought to a lasting end. Europe is stepping up, but Japan can help too, including on ramping up economic pressure on Putin.
Lammy added that Japan and the UK have a shared interest in maintaining a rules-based world order, something his Japanese counterpart agreed to.
We agreed that Japan and the UK will continue to exchange views towards achieving a just and lasting peace in Ukraine.
Lammy said both the UK and Japan have an interest in maintaining their friendship. Particularly, he said, at a time where economic growth and security are closely linked. Japan has the fourth largest economy in the world, while Britain the sixth. British Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds said the UK and Japan agree international free trade is crucial.
Economic security is national security. That is why the UK and Japan have agreed to enhance our economic security partnership. Our close relationship means that we can be important partners for each other on this. In fact, at this time, we must be.
Ukrainian Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal said on Friday that Ukraine received a first package of funds worth about $1 billion from Britain. This was secured by the proceeds of frozen Russian assets. He said the funds will go towards strengthening Ukraine's defense capabilities and benefiting the country. After Shmihal's announcement, an ally of Putin said Britain would have to return the money to Moscow. The Speaker of Russia's lower house of parliament called it an illegal gift to Ukraine that violates the principle of property rights. Turning to Europe, the EU's top representatives debriefed partner countries on Thursday's emergency summit. The 27 EU leaders signed off on a move to loosen budget restrictions so that willing EU countries can increase their military spending. This could free up around $705 billion. Following the debrief, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer hailed this as a historic step forward, saying closer collaboration and a combined industrial base was vital. Malcolm Hudson, NTD News, London.
European Union leaders are discussing plans to boost defense spending. This would align with President Trump's agenda to have the EU take a bigger stake in its own defense. NTD's international correspondent David Vives reports from Paris.
In a joint statement on Thursday, 26 of 27 EU member states pledged to increase defense spending and maintain strong support for Ukraine. EU leaders backed a European Commission proposal allowing more fiscal flexibility for defense. They also discussed a plan to jointly borrow up to about $162 billion to strengthen their militaries. The new defense spending aligns with Trump's request for Europe. Some EU member states also said that they hope this spending can be carried out within a framework of cooperation with Trump's new peace plan for Ukraine. However, EU leaders have recently intensified their stance against Russia, accusing the country of being a direct threat to European nations and engaging in election interference. Meanwhile, a former official with the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, Benoît Paré, says Macron's speech on Wednesday marks a turning point in French diplomacy.
He somehow raised the bar higher in terms of the perception of the threat from Russia. So this is some kind of an unprecedented step. I don't think he had ever been so clear about the idea of a threat, direct threat coming from Russia.
EU leaders this week have discussed the possibility of deploying peacekeeping troops to Ukraine. Some countries, including France, Italy, and UK, are willing to do it. However, Russia didn't agree to such a proposal, saying this would lead to an extremely dangerous escalation.
I mean, President Trump right now is on a course not to put boots on the ground, but to have a ceasefire and to have peace agreement in Ukraine. This is what President Trump stands for as of now, clearly. He said so repeatedly. But the European Union leaders, they are on an opposite path. They do not want peace at any cost. They want peace at Ukraine's conditions and not at Russia's conditions.
Zelensky said on Thursday that US and Ukrainian officials will meet next week to discuss a peace plan. David Vives, NTD News, Paris.
Coming up, President Trump seeking a new deal with Iran to restrain his rapidly advancing nuclear program. That's to replace the agreement he pulled out of during his first term. What would bring Iran to the negotiating table again? A Middle East affairs analyst joins us to discuss after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. President Trump sent a letter to Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei this week seeking a new nuclear deal with Tehran to replace the one he withdrew from during his first term in office. Trump acknowledged the letter in an interview given to Fox Business News that hasn't been fully released. There hasn't been official confirmation that Khamenei has received the letter. Speaking to reporters at the White House today, Trump said, quote, "Something's going to happen very soon with Iran." Joining us now to discuss these latest developments is David Wormser, Middle East Affairs Analyst at the Center for Security Policy. David, thank you so much for joining us. Good to see you again. Now, President Trump has pointed to Iran's oil wells as a potential negotiating card. He goes on to say that if Iran doesn't agree, the U.S. will have to take military action. What do you make of this approach to handling Tehran?
Yeah, I think the increasing threats against Iran certainly are going to get the attention of Tehran. I don't think America is the real threat or shouldn't be the real threat against Iran. I think it's more that they should just greenlight Israel if they're going to do it. I think the United States right now has so many wars elsewhere that perhaps it's best if it leans on its allies who are willing to do. If we already have an ally willing to do it, let's let that ally do it. But that said, I think what President Trump is doing is straight out warning Tehran that this is their last chance to give up the nuclear program thoroughly, not like the faux agreement that was in 2015 with President Obama, but a real disarmament agreement. And then maybe we can move forward. But at this point, I think he's giving Iran that last final warning before Israel most likely strikes Iran.
Now, we did see the Biden administration consider restoring the Iran nuclear deal in hopes of curbing Iran's growing nuclear abilities. In your view, what would bring Iran to the negotiating table to denuclearize itself?
Well, I think Iran, if it fears very much an Israeli strike, it will come to the table eventually, if only to derail that strike. Iran has no real intention of giving up its nuclear weapons program, nor can it anymore, because its regime is in such trouble and so devastated strategically. Its reputation is so damaged. It seems to be so weak that it really only has one ace in the hole left, which is its nuclear program. So there's no way they're going to give that up. But they do want to split the United States from Israel. And the only way to do that is to enter negotiations and try to seduce the United States into talks that prolong this until Israel's attention or ability to strike Iran is degraded. And then also to threaten, in my view, Saudi and other Gulf states' oil to convince America, oh, there will be a war that you will be entangled with. So Iran will play this game of offering negotiations for a deal and threatening a war that will entangle the United States if the United States gives in to Israel's strike of Iran, both of which are really, in the end, in my view, not going to lead to a good result they won't give up their nuclear program. And if they really want to pick a war with the United States, it's not going to end very well for them.
And of course, all of this comes as a report by the UN nuclear watchdog last month notes Iran has accelerated its production of near weapons grade uranium. Now, Iran, of course, says its nuclear program is for peaceful purposes. How real is the threat of Iran reaching nuclear capability, and how would that impact the region, as in the Middle East?
Well, I think it's very real. I think they're dead set on getting there and getting there fast. I think that they're trying to cut corners now and perhaps having a much more crude bomb, not one as quite refined and developed as one would expect, less potent, say, than the Hiroshima bomb, but still a bomb. And they hope to get there very soon, perhaps within weeks and months. So the clock is ticking extremely fast, first of all, on that. And the second thing is the Israelis last September took out Iran's air defense structures, which are slowly being rebuilt. So there's a timeline there as well.
And given Trump and Khamenei's history from the first Trump term, Trump withdrawing from a previous nuclear deal and the assassination of a top Iranian general in 2020, how difficult do you think achieving a peace deal will be between these two nations?
Between the United States and Iran, or?
Yes, and then obviously, Israel is a big player there too, so.
Well, I think peace with Israel and Iran will only come when the Iranian regime is changed, that a different regime will replace the Ayatollahs. And then I think you'll see the friendliness of the Iranian people and the Israelis and the Jewish people flourish. Historically, they've had great relations. It's only this regime that's been the problem. So once it's gone, I think you see peace almost automatically. As far as the United States, this regime declared war on the United States and tried to launch a global revolution against America and the West in 1979, and it hasn't let up since. It's been at war with the United States and all its allies ever since. So I don't see our ability to come to terms in any peaceful way with Iran either, as long as this regime's in power. But it is really hanging by a thread at this point, and a major defeat at the hands of Israel, for example, could be the end of it.
David Wormser, Middle East Affairs Analyst at the Center for Security Policy. Thank you so much for joining us. Coming up, Trump comments on Musk's efforts to reduce the federal workforce, urging DOGE to use a scalpel rather than a hatchet for job cuts. And a classical performing arts company is bringing back an ancient heritage. See what people at Idaho's Capitol say about the story, music, and message of Shen. That and more when we return. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. President Trump responded to growing criticism over Elon Musk's government cuts, saying he wants his cabinet to keep good people. Here's Trump at the Oval Office yesterday.
I want the cabinet members go first, keep all the people you want, everybody that you need, and we want them to keep the good people. And so we're going to be watching them, and Elon and the group are going to be watching them. And if they can cut, it's better. And if they don't cut, then Elon will do the cutting.
The meeting was called following complaints from agency heads to top White House officials about the blunt force approach of the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, which Musk heads. Under the billionaire's direction, DOGE has cut more than 100,000 employees from the 2.3 million strong federal workforce in a matter of weeks. More than 30 lawsuits have already been filed by unions and other advocacy groups challenging DOGE's actions. Thursday marks Trump's first notable public effort to restrain Musk. But when asked if Musk had moved too fast with DOGE, Trump said he did not think so, and that Musk is teaching everybody how to cut costs.
No, I think they've done an amazing job. They've done an amazing job.
After the meeting, Trump on Truth Social doubled down on the importance of retaining valuable staff, saying, quote, "It's very important that we cut levels down to where they should be, but it's also important to keep the best and most productive people," and vowing to use the, quote, "scalpel" rather than the hatchet in future cuts.
And this week, DOGE said it terminated the leases of 30 Food and Drug Administration sites across the country. In this week's announcement, DOGE said the properties total nearly 250,000 square feet. It said terminating these leases would lead to nearly $30 million in savings. DOGE also canceled property leases at a number of other government departments, including the State Department and the Social Security Administration. Meanwhile, the CIA will lay off an unreleased number of junior officers as part of DOGE's cost-cutting sweep. A spokesperson said yesterday new hires with behavioral issues or who have been deemed a poor fit will be fired. And DOGE said yesterday that it canceled a $56,000 contract to water about 8 plants at the Veteran Affairs Department. DOGE said it would water the plants for free instead. In related news, Maryland, California, and 18 other state attorneys general are suing nearly 24 federal agencies yesterday. They seek to reinstate tens of thousands of newer workers laid off in recent weeks. Among the requirements is providing 60 days of advance notice to workers and states. According to the lawsuit, the agencies have not been complying with legal requirements for reductions in force. The states say they've been harmed because they are struggling to identify which agencies have conducted layoffs and which terminated workers require state support. And here are some other legal updates on President Trump's executive actions.
A federal judge denied the request of Treasury workers to block access to their personal data. The judge denied their request for a preliminary injunction over the Department of Government Efficiency and the Treasury Department's access to sensitive banking information. The judge ruled the Federal Workers Union did not present enough evidence to clear the high bar needed for emergency relief. The judge noted the Treasury Department has taken steps to monitor and control DOGE's access to the highly protected payment system. That system is used to send out trillions of dollars in payments for the federal government. The department told the court it is taking steps to limit the risk that sensitive information could be disclosed outside of the government. And a federal judge ruled that President Donald Trump unlawfully fired the chairwoman of the National Labor Relations Board. Gwen Wilcox had been serving as chair of the NLRB. In a ruling yesterday, U.S. District Judge Beryl Howell called Trump's attempt earlier this year to fire her a, quote, blatant violation of the law. The judge, in her 36-page opinion, said the president is testing the courts by trying to push the bounds of his office. This makes it the third time in less than a week that a federal judge has ruled it is unlawful for Trump to fire officials who head independent agencies. And another judge ordered the Trump administration to expedite payments to partners of the U.S. Agency for International Development and the State Department. The administration faces multiple lawsuits on the foreign aid freeze and for ending the USAID. During a 4-hour hearing yesterday, the federal judge questioned the Trump administration's view that presidents have the authority to override Congress on foreign policy spending. A day before the hearing, the Supreme Court ruled that President Trump cannot freeze funding that comes through USAID. The judge has now given the administration until Monday to pay almost $2 billion in debt owed under foreign aid funding agreements.
Theater goers excited and touched by a cultural performance. Shen was just at the capital of Idaho. NTD is a proud media sponsor of Shen. NTD's David Lamb reports.
Shen, the classical Chinese dance and music company, just wrapped up 2 performances in Boise, Idaho from March 5th and March 6th. Now, audience members talked about how the performance is not just entertainment, but they found hope in the show. Let's take a look, shall we?
It's inspiring when you see people access their higher selves, you know, and some of the people, the warrior.
This is my second time, and I was completely blown away like I was the first time. It was spectacular.
There's synchronization in the costumes, and I was really excited to find out that there was actually going to be a live orchestra, so that made the icing on the cake.
Based in New York, Shen Yun's mission is to revive genuine traditional culture. From legends to modern-day stories of the current persecution happening in China, patrons were moved.
I've seen it 5 or 6 times. It never occurred to me until tonight that, you know, the suppression of culture was not just in China, it was also over here.
I love the way that they tell the stories through not only the dancers, but the visual support that is happening on stage. Yeah, very clever.
Every scene, you just wanted to see more and more, and they fulfilled everything that in this. We've seen it now 3 times.
Ancient Chinese culture was also divinely inspired, an aspect that audience members resonated with.
It's a blessing.
The fact that they talk about going back to heaven and, you know, the teachings of earth and heaven is what touched me the most.
I'm very inspired to learn that this performance has a lot about divinity and bringing God's presence down to earth. I find that just very insightful. Certainly it touches my heart.
NTD News, Boise, Idaho.
And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.